This is mission 4 of Amazing Earth Level 1. After completing this mission, you'll be ready to take a level up. Level ups allow you to move one step closer to going to level 2 of this Amazing Earth unit. We've done mission 1, mission 2, mission 3, now mission 4. We've learned about the layers of the earth, we've learned about rocks and minerals, we've learned about weathering, and finally today we're going to learn about erosion and deposition. Erosion and deposition are part of the same process that weathering is. It's about changing Earth's surface through natural processes. Your mission objective is to be able to explain the relationship between weathering, erosion, and deposition in changing Earth's surface. How are they all related to each other? What do they have to do with one another? That is what you need to be able to do today in this mission. I told you it was very important to remember that weathering takes place when a rock is broken down and stays in one place. Once that rock that's broken down starts to move, that's when erosion starts to occur. Once it starts to move, that weathered piece of rock, that broken down piece of earth, once it starts to move, that's when erosion occurs, not before. If it's just stationary, staying in one place, it's just weathering, not erosion. A lot of times students and sometimes adults get those two terms mixed up. Weathering is in one place, erosion is when that rock takes a move to a different location. So what is erosion? Erosion is the process of carrying away weathered or broken pieces of rock. Just as weathering had agents of weathering, causes of weathering, so does erosion. There are 4 that we're going to look at today. Moving water, moving ice, wind, and gravity. And they're all going to seem pretty similar to the agents of weathering, but remember, it's different because we're only looking at a small fraction of this process when it's weathering. It's just the breaking away of those parts, but when those parts are moved from a different place, that's when erosion occurs. So moving water can both break away and also move rock. Moving ice can also break away and weather rock, and it can also erode it and move it. Same thing with wind and gravity. Moving water from streams and rivers can carve grooves in Earth's surface that later become valleys and canyons after many, many years. The Grand Canyon is an example of this agent of erosion. Over many, many years, water, moving water, wore away part of a landform, moved it to a different location through moving water, and it eroded and caused canyons and valleys. Then we also have moving ice, like glaciers. We have learned in social studies that glaciers move very slowly, and they help carve out Earth's surface. And how they do that is as they move, glaciers will wear away rock and soil and take it to another location. Here you see a picture of glaciers. See how part of the mountain has been carved down. It's become smaller because of that glacier. Wind is also an agent of erosion. Once wind has broken down rock and made it smaller through the process of weathering, it can also carry that rock to a different location. You can see in the picture on the left that wind is carrying a lot of soil and a lot of dirt to a different location. That is an example of erosion. It can also pound against a landform, as you see in the picture on the right, weather that rock, and then that rock slides down the slope of that landform, and it also erodes part of that landform. So we've talked about moving water, moving ice, wind, and now we're going to talk about the fourth agent of erosion, and that is gravity. Gravity is unlike moving water, moving ice, and wind, in that gravity can really make erosion to occur very quickly. Heavy rains and other type of erosion may loosen material on a steep slope. Gravity will then pull the loosened material downward. The bits of rock and soil that were broken down may travel slowly downhill a little at a time, but it also might cause those little bits of earth to travel very quickly. The rapid downhill movement of a large amount of rock and soil is called a landslide. Buildings, as you see in the picture, cars, trees, and other objects are sometimes carried along with sliding soil. So you can see in the picture an example of how gravity has caused a landslide. It can also cause mudslides. It can also cause avalanches. That's erosion above ground. Gravity can also cause erosion underground with sinkholes. Water underground can dissolve certain rocks, such as limestone. We learned about this in chemical weathering. This can create caverns and pools underground. When these areas are too big, gravity can cause the soil above them to collapse. Sinkholes can also develop either slowly over a long period of time or very rapidly without much notice. Houses. People have been in houses and sinkholes have developed, and people in their houses, they have lost their house because of this type of erosion. So it's important to know where that occurs, and we're going to talk about how scientists know that and how we can prevent it, and we'll get to that just in 1 minute. But after erosion occurs, weathering has already happened. The bits and pieces of rock have been broken down. Erosion has carried them away, but it's not going to carry them away forever. Eventually they have to stop, and that occurs through the process of deposition. These are the forces that carry away rocks during erosion. After that process is over, we call that process deposition. Deposition can also happen quickly, or it can happen slowly. A couple landforms like deltas and sand dunes can develop because of deposition. Here in the picture you see sand dunes. Sand dunes are small mountains, small hills of sand that have developed because wind has carried sand from one place to another. Erosion, remember, wind is an agent of erosion. But that wind has stopped somewhere and it has settled that sand on top of a hill, on top of each other, kind of layered, and caused a sand dune. So deposition is when erosion has stopped and it's moved rock and earth from one place to another, and it's no longer moving. So first comes weathering, then comes erosion, and then finally comes deposition. Weathering can happen without erosion. Weathering can happen without erosion, but erosion cannot happen without weathering. That is important for you to know. Weathering can happen without erosion, but erosion and deposition cannot occur. They can't happen if weathering doesn't first happen. That's very important for you to know. Hint, hint, that will be a question that you might see sometime during this mission. Why is it important to study this? Because scientists like to know the history of erosion and how it might affect an area. If we know that an area has a tendency to have a lot of erosion, we're not going to want to build buildings there. We're not going to want to build homes on land that might have sinkholes for obvious reasons. So it's important to know how erosion and deposition have worked in the past. Knowing that erosion and deposition aren't always a good thing, what are some ways that we can control it or prevent erosion and deposition from happening? One way is to plant trees and other plants that will help stop wind and water from eroding rocks and soil. So planting things are good to help stop erosion from occurring. People can also build structures and barriers to help prevent landslides along coastlines. These barriers will help stop erosion from affecting those areas. So there are some things that we can do to prevent erosion from happening. Before we conclude, let's talk about our summary of what we just learned today in this mission. We learned that when weathered pieces of rock are moved from one place to another, this is called erosion. Remember, erosion can't happen without weathering happening first. Many forces help cause erosion. The four we learned about were water, ice, wind, and gravity. When the weathered pieces of rocks find a new home after erosion has taken place, we call that deposition. Finally, the study of erosion and deposition is important to scientists because it allows them to predict erosion patterns and the best ways to prevent erosion from happening again in the future. You are now going to continue in this mission. To learn more about erosion, watch some videos, do some activities before taking the checkpoint at the very end. At the end of that checkpoint, if you get the right score, get enough points, you will then be able to move on to the next mission, which will then lead you closer to going to the next level in our Amazing Earth unit. If you have any questions as you filled out your note guide, please note them in your muddiest point, as well as by raising your hand in class when it is appropriate to do so.